Hello, everybody, and welcome. When we started Narativ Canada 2 weeks ago, we had an inkling that Canada was ready for a dose of the cold, hard truth about the corruption of our politics. But we never expected the size of the outpouring. Many of you wrote in. Some of you said you could finally begin to see Canada as it really is. Over 15,000 viewers checked out episode 1, which is more than a typical hour on CBC and CTV news channels combined. Our first episode was all about Pierre Poilievre's refusal to submit to a security clearance check. We pulled back the layers of who Poilievre really is. And it didn't take long for that message to make it all the way to Stephen Colbert's Late Show on CBS.
Even in Canada, your Conservative Party leader, your opponent there, has been called Canada's Trump. And I'm sorry about that.
Now, it's great that Colbert could share that story. But back home, the Canadian media continues to fail us. And that's what tonight's show is all about. The crisis in truth in Canada. My special guest is Dean Blundell. Dean Blundell is the host of the Dean Blundell Show and the founder of Crier Media. He's been a leading voice in calling out the corruption in Canada's democracy. And he joins us today for the second edition of Narativ Canada. Now, Dean, how are you doing?
I'm great. I'm good. Nice to be here in the land of milk and honey, which actually stinks a lot like the United States at the moment. So, yeah, I love it.
It does have this little stench, I guess, of MAGA that's permeating through our system here. Last time we spoke, it was for the first time We've discovered the depth of which our Conservative Party leader was refusing to go through a security clearance check. That was news to me. And I was, wow, this is crazy. How can the Conservative Party leader
How guy with a 20-point lead in the race to become Canada's next prime minister not have a national security background check? Is that what you're saying? Yeah.
I mean,
it's
isn't it kind of part of the job? You'd have to, at the end of the day, deal with national security issues. Yeah. Maybe these days you don't need that. Maybe you just show up and insult people, which is a lot of what he does. Just after we did that show, it was UN week in New York, and Trudeau was on the Colbert Show. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. That was a breakthrough moment. I'd not seen any American media refer to the Conservative Party leader at all. Never mind in this way.
So, you called him a fascist and a far-right leader? Yeah.
Here's a little clip. Clearly, when the UN General Assembly is that the far right and flirtations with fascism, at the very least, is rising across the globe. Even in Canada, your Conservative Party leader, your opponent there, has been called Canada's Trump. And I'm sorry about that. But I'm curious why at least some form of nativism or far-right xenophobia might grow in a country even as polite as Canada. Why do you think this is getting a foothold even in your country?
But, see, that phrase, even in Canada, we're not some magical place of unicorns and rainbows all the time.
There's a great point. Not some magical place. I think that's really that was a great little statement. Whether you like Justin Trudeau or not, it is not a magical place where division does not exist. You know that.
It's real people.
Yeah.
Easily divided when you feed them enough propaganda. But
sure.
It was interesting. Certainly, the good thing is Colbert has as much trouble saying Poilievre's name as I do. But I'm learning, so he doesn't mention it at all. But he does identify him successfully as being a fascist, which is good. And then later, at some point, he calls him Canada's Trump, right? So that's not great for the Conservative Party. The biggest talk show host in the world, late night talk show host in the world, is talking about their future prime minister as that. That's not good branding. I know you're a little skeptical about the possibility of him being exposed, but do you think this kind of attention from Colbert and others can actually expose Poilievre for who he is?
It's weird. I've seen so many kill shots, not ending kill shots in politics over the past 10 years. You would probably say the same thing coming from the time we live in, where you used to see people whose political fortunes would rest on their reputation. And then if you heard something bad about that person, their reputation would get sullied. They would be immediately removed, because back when we grew up, you had to have this sterling reputation. It was like this purity circle jerk for politicians. Oh, he had an affair. Oh, he did this. Oh, he's this. But we live in a time and an era where those things are celebrated. Working with foreign governments are celebrated. Working against the interests of a current government are celebrated. And people don't care how they get there, right? They don't care if they work with Donald Trump. They don't care if they work with Vladimir Putin. They don't care if Donald Trump's a felon. In a lot of cases where you watch guys like Walt Masterson or the Good Liars go into a Trump crowd and go, hey, was 34 felonies bother you? And they're like, I like them.
Yeah.
You're like, what the
But it's another 34. You want more.
I love those. We live in kind of a weird, bizarro time where the anti-hero or the person who rails against the establishment can paint themselves through pure illegality, through doing terrible things, through being a far-right fascist, can paint themselves as a legitimate alternative because there are people out there that share those values. So will it out him? Will that go a long way on Colbert to kind of stemming the tide of conservative support because they know the conscience of that individual is a far-right fascist leading dickhead?
Yeah.
I don't think so because they have the ability to go around that. That's why Rebel News and True North and Breitbart and Fox exist, right? Because they will not give a shit about anything that they see on mainstream television. They'll just continue to adhere to their confirmation bias.
That is all true. I think that we are in battle between good and evil in the world. Clearly, that's what's going on. And
Sure.
the bad people have bad guys. If they continue to do bad, it works for them in this context where bad is rising. Once bad is defeated or is being defeated, then good will come back, hopefully, and the bad guys won't do so well in this environment.
Yeah.
But you talked about kill shots, and it reminds me of Maxime Bernier.
Maxime Bernier. Yeah. Former conservative cabinet minister who lost the leadership to Andrew Scheer, immediately got butthurt and started this weirdo party about called the People's Party of Canada, which is the absolute opposite. It's just like anti-immigration, and it literally concedes to the dumbest 2% of Canada's population. But continue. Yes, Maxime Bernier.
So in my little brief return to Canadian television, when I worked at the CBC, I produced a show called The Weekly with Wendy Mesley, which is going to be this like forward-leaning show about everything I'd done on my blog and everything I'd done on my podcast. They said, why don't you come here and do it in Canada and have no interference from us in management at all, and we'll give you half an hour on TV every week, and you could just be you. You can continue your Twitter account and whatever. And it sounded oddly too good to be true, and it landed up being too good to be true. But there was a moment there when we were doing all this great work exposing this whole influence network that had been arrived around the world. And one of the things we did was expose Bernier for being attached to the entire Koch brother industry thing.
KOC brothers.
The Koch. I don't know.
Koch brothers. Yeah, Koch, doesn't matter. Yeah.
And it was actually, I think, the kill shot of his career. I'm going to play you a clip from that interview because I do think it's relevant to what's going on today with Polyev and his Wendy from way back.
Yeah, it's pretty easy to raise money when you're espousing libertarian values.
I would add, it's easy to raise money when you're saying what you believe to Canadians.
You have said that you would like to be Canada's Ron Paul. He ran to be president of the United States, but he is seen as the intellectual godfather of the Tea Party. Is that what you want here? Do you want a Canadian Tea Party?
No, I didn't say that I want to be the Ron Paul. I say I really admire Ron Paul because he's an authentic politician.
But you saw what happened to Ron Paul had all of these ideas that you espouse as well. But the Tea Party got hijacked by a lot of people with bigoted points of view. Are you afraid of that?
No, because the advantage that I have, I'm building a party based on a program, the program that I fight for and I put forward during the leadership campaign for the Conservative Party of Canada a year ago. So people who want to be part of that party must share our program. If they don't share our program, they're not welcome, and they just have to create their own party.
You got a lot of criticism for your comments about extreme multiculturalism, kicked off quite a debate. It has become a bit of a dog whistle for people with bigoted points of view. And I know that you have spoken out about how you don't want these people in your party. You're trying to get them off your social media. But I do wonder if you've noticed that Rebel Media, for example, does seem to be fond of you. It's been accused, of course, of being supportive of white supremacist views. Ezra Levant, they have 1 million subscribers on YouTube, 150,000 followers on Facebook. Do you want his support? Do you want his audience?
I want people who believe in our ideas. And it can be people who are watching this show right now, people who are watching the Ezra Levant and the Rebel. It can be people watching Radio Canada. People who
Because
believe
like
it.
Andrew Scheer won't go on his show anymore after what happened in Charlottesville. That it was seen as being promoting racist ideals. Or you don't have a problem with that.
I didn't receive an invitation to go on his show, and if I received it, I will think about it.
Anyhow, that is interesting because that's
Interesting because I had a really hard time understanding him as well. But yes, go ahead.
Yes, he would be a great leader of this country.
Like Chrétien. Remember when Chrétien was the leader? It was like,
dude.
oh, fuck, dude. Come on.
He had
You
a
got to master
disability,
the
though.
English
It was
language.
different. Disability?
So not a disability enough to not master the English language at his age. Anyway, sorry, continue. Yes, go ahead.
So, that was the end of Bernier's brief start to his political future. I think that interview killed him. And it was brave of the CBC to do it. And then also really weak and lack of courage in firing me soon afterwards because Rebel Media sued them for
Did you get fired right after that?
That contract was not renewed because Rebel Media sued them for that interview.
Because of that interview?
Yeah. So I'm only saying this because welcome to Canada, where no one is going to...
Hang on. Just wait. Hang on. I know why you're saying it because it's true.
Yeah.
But let me just back up to your point, and I'm going to grease the tracks and you go ahead and go down that track with your train of truth.
Yeah.
Canada is the most media corrupt country on the planet. It is, and we present this fucking crazy attitude of, oh, we're just here for the people. No, they're not. They are absolutely not. The second you lean on a media institution with any kind of legal notice, they will shit their fucking pants and give you whatever you want.
Oh, yeah.
And I'll tell you why they do it. And it happened to me. It happened to you. It's happened to everybody in this industry where someone becomes overly powerful. Someone's brand becomes bigger than other people's brands. They're like, that guy could hurt us. Let's go to their boss and let's get them fucking fired. That is exactly what happens in this country. It happens every time. It happened to you. Just finding out about it now. And I'm telegraphing because I know no details about your firing whatsoever. But I can guarantee you got over your skis by allowing Wendy Mesley the freedom to ask that man an honest question. He gave honest answers. Rebel Media didn't like it. And this 1 million followers called the CBC and made some kind of alleged statement that you were out to get him and they were going to sue you and the CBC if they didn't fire you. And shortly thereafter, I'm guessing you were fired.
Yeah. It was for various different kinds of reasons. They wouldn't say it was for that reason, but and Ezra didn't hide it. Ezra did a couple of segments on the YouTube channel about me, which is all good and fair. Go ahead and knock your socks off. There's many media content commentaries about what you're seeing on TV as well. But
sure,
the power of these institutions is so corrupted by, I don't know if it's the mob or if it's just the general conservative party or the...
I'll tell you what they're corrupted by. I'll tell you what they're corrupted
by so many sources that it's impossible to get the news out anymore.
And I'll tell you what they're corrupted by. They're corrupted by opportunity. A guy like Ezra Levant is no different than any other beleaguered media company in this country or in the United States. If money, they're in business. Doesn't matter who you are. And if you're going to damage their reputation, they're in the business of ruining you immediately. Doesn't matter who you are. And a guy like Ezra Levant operates underneath this thin veneer of bullshit, this illegality of grifting, this idea that he's here for a group of people when he's not, he's here for himself. And so what he does is he lies. And Ezra, I'm looking at you, you know I'm telling you the truth because I put that Kaylin Robertson interview out and you have not said a fucking word. I invited you on this show. And I'm just speaking to him, but I'll get back to you in just a second. Ezra, I've invited you on this show. You have denied me the opportunity to talk to you. You refused to engage with me. You unblocked me just so you could answer that tweet about Kaylin Robinson, who called you and your illegality out. So if you want to come for me and let's have this conversation in a legal or public square. Anyway, to that point, Ezra Levant is the worst thing in Canada. He is a disease. He's one of those media vampires that never made it. He was never anybody in legal circles. He had to rely on political circles. He goes to Calgary. He offers Stephen Harper his fealty. Then he moves out of the way so Stephen Harper can run in his riding. It's a long story. Pierre Poilievre, everybody. And he has promised everything. Everything. I'll give you everything, Ezra. I'll give you access to my relationships overseas. I'll give you access to the money that we have at the IDU. So when you see Ezra Levant operating, he's operating on behalf of legitimately a religious political interest. So everything that you see, from him getting you fired to stories about migrant uprisings, which aren't real, to stories about anything that man posts, is about making money. And it has been blessed entirely by Stephen Harper and the IDU. Absolutely everything. And here's the fucking great part about that man. Just to let you know how corrupt our media ecosystem is. Here's just to let you know how corrupt that man is. And he is as corrupt as fuck. Ezra Levant, okay? Ezra Levant has been in bed with every single person in the Conservative Party of Canada for a very long period of time. Jeff Ballingall, Corey Ten Eyck, Post Media, Andrew Lawton over at True North, Candace Malcolm, all of them work together, and they all work together under the idea that if they can get enough emails, they can separate people enough digitally that they can tell people how terrible their life is, they can all make money, and they can all give the conservative interests that they serve access to those email addresses so that they can vote for them and they can continue to fucking brainwash individuals in this country. That is Ezra Levant's existence. David Menzies, everybody that works at Rebel News, they are only crisis actors for effect and money. That is all they exist to do. That is why they are in business. There is no alternative other than that. None. They don't do news. I don't know if you heard this in Canada. I don't know. What was it, fucking 2 weeks ago? Canada, the Supreme Court of Canada put out a proceeding because Ezra Levant applied for tax deductible status that would indicate he is a legitimate media company. So in Canada, to be a legitimate media company, to apply for those tax write-offs and subsidies for a media company, you have to qualify by doing the majority of your work has to be original work. It has to be new material, right? It has to qualify as original content. 1%, according to the Supreme Court of Canada and according to the CRA, 1% of the work that happens at Rebel News. In fact, it was less than 1%. I'm being kind saying 1%. They said less than 1% of the content Rebel News does is actual news. The rest of it is, quote, and I'm quoting, paid advocacy. So
that's interesting.
Not sure if you still feel bad about getting fired by a group that gets paid to do paid advocacy, but that's exactly what happened. And the reason why is to protect the idea that they were a real news outlet, which they indeed are not. They're just human garbage.
But the CBC pretends to really be a news outlet and do actually say that they deliver the news, and they probably do a little bit more than 1% of the news in their newscasts. And then that's for them to be so easily swayed by a lawsuit from Ezra and whomever, just because someone did an interviewing the leader of the People's Party and did what her job was. It's challenging. It was challenging then. It was done then. But when you look at the environment we're stepping into now, and we spoke about this last time we were on the show, where we're facing a potential CBC being weaponized by a really conservative government in becoming a state propaganda machine against Canadians, then it becomes a little troubling. It's one thing if it's a little incident with me on one show, but can you imagine that on a mass scale? A CBC that's really turned into an authoritarian tool is a nightmare.
Yeah, you know what? And we get a glimpse into that through the lens of what happened with CTV this last week in Canada, right, Zev?
Yep.
Is CTV puts out a story with Pierre Poilievre, who's going day after day, he's asking for non-confidence votes, in the House of Commons. And to understand Canadian politics, we've got a House of Commons, we've got a Senate, we've got provincial, municipal politics. But in Canada, it would be akin to the Congress is the House of Commons. We've got MPs who represent three different parties, NDP, Conservative, Liberal. To that point, Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives have been begging for an election because they're so far up in the polls, they think they're going to win. And they've got some stuff that they're currently hiding and running from, which we all know is true. Foreign interference into his leadership platform via India and Russia and China. That is true. We know it's true. We just don't know the extent and the players because the NSICOP report won't release those names for obvious reasons. Don't want to damage anybody's reputation unless we know they're guilty. So having said all that, now we look at the idea that this company that perverts media stories on their behalf, that goes around mainstream media with derelict media like Rebel News, the Western Standard, et cetera, which have been deemed advocate platforms, right? Might ascend to power. And where it gets interesting again is what happened with CTV. So CTV puts out a little story this week. They said Pierre Poilievre is campaigning for this new election. Here's why. This is what he calls it. He calls it the dental care election. He doesn't. He calls it the carbon tax election. Both are ridiculous. Both are fucking red herrings. It's got nothing to do with carbon taxes. The only reason he's trying to get an election right now is because he is massive in the polls and he knows that some really shitty things are going to come out about him, but he can't say that. So anyway, they fuck up. You got a couple junior people over at Bell Media, CTV. They put out the wrong clip of him saying something about dental care, points to an election. Pierre Poilievre literally threatens Bell, which is one of the biggest companies in the world, threatens BCE, threatens their lobbyists, threatens their business enterprise and says, we will not give you access to our party unless those people get fired. Now you've sent a chilling fucking nerve down the spine of every mainstream media outlet in this country who think that because this man is up 20 points in the polls, he's going to become the next prime minister. And so you have a bunch of people that are running scared from him. And that was a design. That was a thing. Here's the fucking catch. BCE, Bell, enormous proponents of that program, enormous donors, enormous supporters of Pierre Poilievre and the Conservative Party of Canada. They've obviously had a few conversations because this last weekend, CTV was rife with Conservative Party of Canada content. They were rife with commercials. They spent millions on one channel this weekend just trying to convince everybody that Pierre Poilievre was here for Canadians, which he is indeed not. He is here literally for the theocratic business interests of the elite wealthy people in this country, and he is lying to you if he is saying otherwise. Lying. So the idea that man might be able to access our public broadcaster and then put enough people on the board of CBC and the public broadcaster to be able to scare the shit out of people and curate a new reality in this country should scare the crap out of everybody. And you know that better than most.
Yeah. And look, if he's done it with CTV just by threatening a boycott of them, and imagine what
he's
happens.
Threatening a lack of access to him.
Yeah, who cares? You know, now you imagine that on an industrial scale at the biggest broadcast in terms of staffing, and you've got a real challenge there. And of course, it's not only the Conservative Party, it's not only the Canadian interests that are being at play here. You mentioned Stephen Harper and the IDU, but allied to that whole anti-democratic world are the Russians. And there was a hearing this week, and maybe you can tell me a little bit more about this hearing. This was Alexandra, I'm not going to say her name correctly, Shvetsy or something. She's the head of the Ukrainian Congress, the Canadian Congress, apparently.
Canadian Congress, yeah.
And they were talking about the influence of Russia in terms of a disinformation player in this marketplace. And I'm going to play 2 clips from this. This one's really interesting. It refers to Tenet Media. And then the second one also talks about spies, the amount of spies that are around Canada now. But let's go to the first one.
So Russia co-opts authoritative, influential, and persuasive individuals, academics, journalists, social media influencers, who Stalin called useful idiots, to repeat and amplify their narratives. And when these narratives are word for word what the Russian embassy and Putin are saying, why does no one ask why? We know that we're here to discuss the RT-run Tenet or doppelganger operation involving a Canadian company owned by 2 Canadians using Canadian social influencers. They produce Canadian-themed videos on hot-button divisive issues, and once they have the ear of a frightened and disaffected audience, they blame the economy and everything else that is wrong in the world on Canadian support for Ukraine.
So she's not wrong. She's 100% right. This is exactly what Russia's been doing. And there's useful idiots and there's other useful idiots. Poilievre is just as much of a useful idiot as anybody else. So these guys are basically bought and paid for shills. And it's happening in Canada with no one really paying attention to it.
And listen, these people operate like Russia, in China, India, they operate through agencies, right? So they'll put in some buys, they'll spend 40 grand here, 100 grand there, $250,000 here with different media companies to curate stories that are favorable to their preferred client or content. And that content has to include a couple of different things. It's got to include anti-immigration, anti-LGBTQ, anti-gender neutral bullshit. It's got to include, they're coming for us, climate change, anti-climate change, anti-science, all those things. That was borne out in the DOJ assertion that we are being taken over by Russian disinformation. with help from China, with help from India. If you look at where all the fucking bot farms are, it's China, India, Russia.
Yeah.
A little bit in the Philippines, but the Philippines, it's an advantageous economy, right? It's, hey, what can we do that we can kite off of different things and make a little bit of money? That's what the Philippines is. Long story short, we are living in a time where people can openly collude with other countries and say they knew nothing about it and claim to just be those useful idiots when they clearly know, like in the case of Pierre Poilievre, in the case of the Conservative Party, MAGA, Maple MAGA, GOP, conservatives in Canada, they know they're living under the wake and behind the influence of that anti-immigration shit that comes out of Russia. So they can claim that they didn't know. But what's concerning, if you're a critical thinker in either Canada or the United States, and I'd welcome your thoughts on this, is if you claim to be a critical thinker, and that critical thinking in a democratic society, which you enjoy the freedoms of, tells you that you espouse dictatorial values, do you want to look inside a little bit at that point?
No,
You want to
apparently
go,
just take the money and run.
I don't know. Do you want to go, I don't know why I feel so akin to what Vladimir Putin is doing to the Ukrainian people. I agree with the denazification of a country that's got no Nazis, but do you not at some point go, as a political party, our messaging aligns with the fucking dictatorial premier of Russia? We should probably do some soul searching in a democratic country, right? But they don't. And that is why they're not just useful idiots. They're purely helping that ideology and that dictator and the idea behind what Russia is. They want to bring that to this country. They want a dictatorial approach to governance. That is why they're trying to make it okay.
And the reason they want a dictatorial approach to government is because they want to basically steal the wealth of Canada. Basically, what they did in Russia was they plundered the entire country. They took all the money out, they gave it to a bunch of oligarchs, and if you're lucky to be one of them, great for you, but the rest of the country suffers as they launder every useful dollar out of that country. And that is what's going to happen to Canada. As clearly as if you have politicians who are not paying attention and who don't care or just want the money, and you've got the media, which is so bought out and so corrupt that they aren't actually reporting the news. And you've got a population that is so then dumbed down or unaware or ignorant or chooses to ignore.
Tired.
And they're buying all this bullshit on Twitter about Trudeau being terrible and all this other stuff. All of that is engineered to create a scenario where these gangsters, these criminals can plunder the country. And that is what they will do. And we will turn around in 10 years from now and say, hey, what happened to Canada when we had all these great resources and we had all this great stuff and now it's no longer here?
And that's when Zev and I will be living in the bushes in different compounds, and people will come to our compound and go, what happened to the country? You guys were the last line of defense. And we're like, hey guys, we warned you about this for years. You didn't heed our advice. So we're in the woods hiding out until it's over.
I could think of no better person to hide out than you, Dean. That would be amazing. Just the two of us. Yeah, I'm terrific in the wilderness. It's my zone.
A full year after the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, RT was finally sanctioned by Canada, along with other Russian institutions, such as Putin's think tank, the Valdai Club. But no action has been taken by the government with regard to those in Canada who collaborate with these institutions. There are many Canadian contributors to RT who are allowed to operate with impunity. Indeed, some of them are invited to appear before Canadian parliamentary committees. Others are given grants from Canadian taxpayer money to produce Russian propaganda films. We also know that Canada is a preferred destination for Russian sleeper agents because there doesn't appear to be any detection or prevention of foreign espionage in Canada. They come here because we make it easy for them to establish their identities, all the while carrying on their spycraft.
She nailed it, by the way. I don't know who that lady is. She's 1,000% right. Is our business interests are attached so significantly to certain projects and provinces, federally, provincially, municipally, to people that are attached to Russia, that for some reason we're giving the middle finger to the enormous Ukrainian diaspora in this country. Enormous.
And what she's saying is true. We've given grants to people to produce content that is Russian propaganda. Canadian money
Yeah.
Taxpayer money going to Russian propagandists and to make Russian propaganda that will then weaken Canada.
Yeah.
And that's just one example, but all these influence makers, these think tankers, these people like Bernier and Poliev, these people are steeped in Russian money and in Coke money that the stench could not be worse. The stench is really thick and we're still here and no one seems to care.
Yeah. They don't care because Canadians are like I said this on the last show. Canadians are the people who ordered the fish. You brought us the beef and we ate it anyway. We're just good people. And we're also people that learn from our past, right? Like where we can see what happens. We can read the tea leaves and we'll quietly go about our business, but we don't make much of a noise about it ahead of time. And so when we think about where we're going in this next election, as individuals, we have to choose between foreign interference, lies, money laundering, and character. That's the choice in this next election. It's character versus non-character. It's like, how do you choose between someone who you know is going to rob you blind and someone who you're really tired of, who won't rob you blind, but you're just really tired of that person?
Yeah.
That is what's on the agenda in this next election. And unless someone in the Liberal Party in Canada decides to speak to Justin Trudeau and say, hey, dude, you need to move out of the way, that is exactly what's going to happen to Canadians. We are going to get brought into 2016 in the year 2024, 2016 in the United States in the year 2024. That is what's going to happen. We are going to get taken back 10 years. Politically, we're going to be taken back 30 years socially, 50 years socially. Yeah. And we're going to have to legitimately think about what's best for our families if Pierre Poilievre gets into power.
And let's be clear, there's still a very good chance that Donald Trump will be the president of the United States come January. And imagine that south of the 49 and Poilievre north of the 49, that's a very different look.
Hell of a time for content, dude. If you can't find a reason to do a podcast, if those two guys aren't in power, two of the biggest fucking idiots you'll ever meet.
It is good for business.
For us.
Yeah, it is good for us, but that's what we're after. We're after a little bit something completely different.
Yeah.
But it's American and Canadian interests are really at risk, and it's people's interests. And people call this advocacy journalism. I'm not sure if it would ever be considered anything like that. But you're only an advocacy journalist if you're being paid to do something by somebody and report on something you don't believe in. Which, if you're doing the news and you're actually covering things factually and you're delivering information that is accurate and smart and relevant to Canadians and Americans, then you're still just a journalist. There's no advocacy part of it.
And then here's the thing, is like journalism's dead. Zev, we came from a time where it's like, oh, you're a journalist? That means you write and you tell the truth and you're accountable for the things you say. To be considered a journalist today, it should be like a doctor. Like we should be there at this point where it's like, oh, you got to go through these 16 different steps in 12 years of school to be able to be a Sherpa for the truth and accountability and stuff like that. The truck driver pleb can be a journalist.
Yeah.
Johnny from Saskatchewan can be a journalist. That's why when people come up to me and they're like, oh, you own a media company, you're a journalist. I'm like, no. We own a media company so we can be accountable to the facts. In no way are we journalists, because in the name journalism or the name journalist, there's this implication that you tell the truth and you're accountable to it. But that disappeared a long time ago. You and I both know that, right?
Not here. I still stand by the truth. I do it
You do.
Yeah, because someone's got to tell it. It's a niche market now, but it's my market. So I'll just keep sticking to it. Dean, we've got a hell of a job in this next year. I think there's a lot of forces lined up against people who believe in classical democracy and classic human rights and freedom, as it were. It'll be interesting to see who wins at the end of the day, but I don't think we're not there yet. We have not won yet.
No, but what I want to do is have you on my podcast this next week so that we can hammer this all out. I think you and I might be able to fix Canada and the United States in 90 minutes.
Probably. 89 minutes, probably.
You need the full 90. You just need 89 minutes.
Yeah, we could do it. No problem.
All right. You're going to come on my podcast this week?
Yeah, sure, I'd love to.
All right.
I'd be thrilled. I'd be honored. Thank you for being on my show, Dean.
Thank
it's been
you.
really good to see you again, and have a great weekend.
Thanks, brother.
Okay, have a good one.
One day, you'll tell the story of autocrats, crooks, and kings who came for our freedom. A story of citizens who stood up to tyranny and won. The people prevailed and renewed an old vow to a more perfect union. And that was just the beginning. The story continues. Narativ, where truth lives.